moving on to the sixth example, which is another one that many of you identify incorrectly, although some of you got this, right? So a student who regularly makes use of, writes and edits Wikipedia articles, includes a section of an article she wrote in a paper without referencing Wikipedia. So again, this is another instance of self-plagiarism, right? The plagiarism issue here is not that the student is taking ideas from someone else. The problem is that the student is not acknowledging where those ideas originally appeared, right? And if we think about plagiarism, right, there's really those two components to it. It's both that the ideas that you are presenting are your own ideas, but also that you are identifying where ideas came from if they originated outside of that particular text. So the issue here, again, leaving aside the question of whether or not one should make use of Wikipedia in an academic paper, the fundamental issue here is not that she's using material that she had used previously, although that would be an issue if that was all she submitted. Rather, the issue is that she has not acknowledged where this material came from, right? Because that material belongs to, in a sense, belongs to Wikipedia, and needs to be acknowledged as belonging to Wikipedia. If she was, putting this together for a personal blog, she would have to acknowledge that as well, right? That this material kind of was published in a previous form for a different audience. And I think many of these cases are easily avoidable simply by using proper citation procedures, right? That if it's coming from somewhere else, you need to signal to the reader that it's coming from somewhere else. And we'll talk more about those citation procedures in another video, because I don't want to make this one, too long. But we'll try to get that other one up by the end of the week. So as you're thinking about these questions, even if they don't necessarily pertain to what we're doing in this class, you have some things to think about. So we've talked about some examples of plagiarism, and I want to spend some time now talking about the factors that can lead students to plagiarize, because as I've noted, in my experience, and I've had to deal with quite a few plagiarism cases, not just in my own classes, but because I've been responsible for handling, at my previous institution, all plagiarism cases had to come to me to sort of make the decision on whether or not it counted. To think about the factors that lead students to plagiarize. So what are some of those factors? Well, if we think about the factors that might lead someone to plagiarize, one of the main factors that precedes it has to do with things like being pressed for time, poor note-taking, or indistinct paraphrasing. So let's talk about time. Students rushing to meet a deadline So let's talk about these, right? So let's talk about being pressed for time and how that can contribute to unintentional plagiarism. So when you're rushing to meet a deadline, right, there are a number of issues that might occur, right? In the realm of intentional plagiarism, sometimes students panic, right? They haven't met their deadline, the work is due, it might be a very high stakes document, and in their panic, they make a bad decision, right? They don't make a good life choice, right? And so they might, copy a paper from the internet, or go purchase a paper, or borrow a paper from a friend, right? Though I think that is not the most common issue. I think the bigger issue is that when people are rushed for time, they begin to get sloppy, right? They start making errors in the ways in which they put their documents together. So if we talk about, getting sloppy, right, that might mean forgetting to put the quotations in, forgetting to add a citation, or even, as we'll talk about in a second, mixing up their notes, right? Making a mistake in terms of where a source comes from because their notes were not written particularly well. So in terms of bad note-taking, right, source misattribution, failing to cite a source or failing to cite a source properly. They might fail to cite a source because in, taking their notes on a particular source, they, jotted down a quote, but, when they looked back at it, they forgot that it was a quote from a source and instead thought maybe it was an idea that they had previously. Or they might fail to cite sources properly, right? They might mix up their citations, right? They might attribute a quote to a different source. And this even happens with professional writers. Doris Kearns Goodwin, who's a very famous historian, has written about a number of American presidencies, several years ago got into quite a bit of trouble because it turned out that certain passages from her work had been plagiarized, and sort of the excuse that she offered was that she had not intended to do so, but it was a result of some bad note taking on her part, right? That she had failed to note carefully that the material that she was using had come from another source, and in the context of looking at hundreds and hundreds of sources, some had slipped through the cracks, and she had mistakenly thought her notes were her original thinking on that, her original language, rather than a direct quotation. And so, poor note taking can contribute to being pressed for time, because it makes it harder to organize your information. And then these kinds of mistakes that we talked about, for example, in examples 1 and 2, are more likely to occur. We can also see issues in really bad paraphrasing. And this is more of a gray area, but it's really important to note here that paraphrasing language has to be distinct from the original source. That means that you can't just change like a really to a very and say that you're done, right? There has to be significant distinction in the language that's used from the original source to the way that you're writing it up. And as I note in this third point here, if there's any doubt about whether you are sufficiently paraphrasing, then just use a direct quote. I would much rather a student use a direct quote and be precise than run themselves into a situation where there's a bad paraphrase. And as a side note, I'm always happy to look over material, and if you send it to me and say, hey, here's a copy, here's a screenshot of the original, here's my paraphrase, does this work for you? I would be happy to look at that. It's also, again, worth noting that paraphrase sections have to be properly cited, right? You need to signal to the reader where that came from. In APA style, you don't have to give the page number, but you do have to give the author and the year of publication. In MLA, you would need to give the author and the page number if there is a page number, but either way, you need to signal to the writer that the paraphrased information is coming from someone else. Now what we're going to talk about is something a bit, it's a bit adjacent to plagiarism. This isn't technically plagiarism, but is an example of misrepresenting sources. I think that's a really important thing to note, right? So what does it mean to misrepresent a source? Well, it can mean a couple of things. If it's unintentional, it means that you simply misunderstood the source and as a result have represented it incorrectly in your text. So you say that an author is arguing one thing, but they really argued something else, and this is a result of failing to read the text critically enough. But it can also be intentional. Now, we frequently see this in movie promotions. So for example, if you have a movie that is quite bad, you might see a quote like this in the review, right? It's amazing how terrible such and such film is. If that film, if the producers of that film, if the marketing department for that film is really, hard up to get a blurb to use in their advertising, they might selectively use that quote, right? So Barbara Movie Reviewer had this to say about our newest film. It is amazing, right? So have they misquoted? Not technically, right? They are using the author's original words, but they're certainly not quoting them in context, right? They're not providing the larger context to establish what that author was trying to originally say. Before I move forward, I'll give another example from an actual course I taught. A student was writing a paper about a research paper on freedom of religion, and she was trying to argue that in most cases people should have freedom of religion, but not when it dealt with religions that she disagreed with, such as Satanism. And as part of that project, she brought up a court case where two individuals who identified as Satanists were accused of doing a number of horrible crimes, and in her paper she had a quote to the effect of, at the end of the case, something like, quote, the jury found the guilty when she got to the end of the paper, she had a quote, something to the effect of, quote, the jury found them ... guilty, end quote. And I thought that the ... was really suspicious, and when I went to go look it up, what I found was that her her ellipsis covered up the word not. And in our conversations that followed, she said, well, she did that because she couldn't find a source that agreed with her perspective. And my point was that then she probably has a bad argument. So it's really important that when you are quoting, right, that you are using your quotes in a way that are fair to the source as it originally appeared. So what are some things that we can do to reduce the risk of plagiarizing? So first, giving yourself plenty of time. So that might mean enough time to read your material, to take good, so you understand it well. Time to take good notes. Time to get help. So if there's a passage that you don't understand, you can get clarification. If you're not sure how a particular citation is supposed to work, you can get clarification. If you're not sure whether or not a paraphrase is sufficiently distinct enough from the original material, you can get some clarification, right? Taking good notes, right? So writing down the bibliographic information for every source before you begin reading so that you can find it again. Keeping a running document of direct quotes with page citations can be really valuable as you begin putting together larger projects, especially as you start moving into projects that will require you to look at 5, 10, 20 sources. And back everything up, right? Make sure that you have everything saved in multiple places so that you don't run into a situation where at the last minute you find yourself with only half of a paper, right? And you're scrambling to put things back together, because that can certainly lead to the kinds of errors or issues that we've talked about previously. So some resources that you might make use of to help you with this might include the Fairfield University Writing Center. They can help you with citations, they can help you with incorporating sources, they can help talk you through how you might paraphrase something more effectively. You can certainly talk to your instructor, particularly to clarify any gray area questions, right? Do I need to cite this particular kind of source? Is it sufficiently paraphrased? Is this language clear? And then there are multiple online citation guides. So for example, the Purdue OWL has a pretty easily searchable database of the different kinds of citations that you might make use of. I would also note, so a couple of things that came up. Can you use online citation, online citation services like EasyBib, etc.? I really don't have a problem with you doing that. I used to do that all the time. I still do it on occasion. I'll talk more about this in my citation video, but I would say that if you are going to use one of these online citation engines, that you simply double check your work when you're done, because it is possible for them to have errors in transcription as they move from the data that you entered in the fields to processing that into a citation, right? So a miscapitalized word or missing italics or missing period, etc. You're going to want to double check that. But in general, those are fine. I have no specific qualms about you doing that. Additionally, there are services like RefWorks through the library that will help you kind of organize your material as you're going through it. So there are a couple of options, and the librarians are pretty good at this too in terms of helping you suss out any kinds of citation issues that you have. So I hope you found this video informative. I will be posting another video that more specifically goes into citation discussions as you're cleaning up your annotated bibliography entries. So keep an eye out for that, and take care.